Hello, everyone. Welcome
Hello.
to LunchBytes.
There we go. Hey, Steph.
We are live for the first time. I'm really excited.
Very excited.
Yeah,
But I guess before we get into anything, we've got a few things to cover, right?
we do. First, we're going to dive into our content with us right now. And we want everyone to, feel welcome. And also pronouns she and her. And I'm excited to be co-hosting with Chris.
Hello, everyone. Chris Reddington. I'm a cloud solution architect here in the UK as well. And yeah, really excited to be launching this show with Steph and bringing on some amazing guests over the coming weeks. So I guess, Steph, it's probably worth us just doing a bit of an introduction of LunchBytes, what it is, where it came from, and what we've got in store.
Yeah. LunchBytes is one of the things where we want to bring in professionals and in this case, cloud solution architects like you, Chris, in the UK. And this will not be just level 100. We're going above and beyond the regular level 100 things that you might have read in the past. We're going to have some resources later. So we have some modules, some GitHub pages for you to dive in a bit more. And so we'll have those links in the resources section. So we're going to go in deep with a mix of presentations in the future and today for hands-on demos as well as just documentation to help you really deepen your learnings there.
Absolutely. And I guess the other part is, it's not going to be theoretical. We've got those demos, and these folks who we're going to be bringing into the show are going to be people who are working with customers day in, day out, working in the field and bringing some of those learnings that they have with real projects, real customers, and bringing them back and answering some of those top questions that you have. So I guess most importantly, if you have questions along the way, let us know in the chat. We'd love to have that interaction with you all. Please let us know because we are keeping an eye on that. But also then, if you've got ideas for the future as well, we'll give a bit of a tease of what our next session is towards the end of this episode. But we're always wanting to make sure that it's relevant for you. So if you've got something that you want to talk about, lunchbytes@microsoft.com, let us know and we can make sure that we cover that in one of our future episodes as well.
That's awesome.
Good. So I guess then we're kind of 5 minutes in. We should move on to the next segment, which is our developer news radar. I think this is something we're toying with as a bit of an idea, seeing if this might be useful for folks here. And just running through what's new in the developer space, really. So I'll take us away just with maybe a few handy resources for folks that maybe they know, maybe they don't know. And if you did know, then maybe you know some new stuff here as well. So all about making sure that you're keeping up to date. So let me switch over here. So there's a few different sites that I keep tabs on with updates and what's going on in the Microsoft sphere of things going on. So one of those is the Azure blog. This is where a lot of the big updates really happen. So that can be ranging from things like project announcements, it can be industry related things, it could be partnerships with companies, for example, as well. But this is a really great place to go just to keep the pulse on what's going on from an Azure perspective. From a developer side of things, there's been a few interesting updates over the last few weeks. First off, being able to manage Linux anywhere with improved hybrid benefits functionality there, and Red Hat Ansible automation as well. And then another one which is very recent, I think only a week ago actually, was Azure Spring Cloud Enterprise is now available in preview. So if you're a Java developer and looking to use Spring Cloud in some of your applications or Spring Boot, that type of framework, this could be a great offering for you to go and check in on and see what's going on there. Now, this is just one of many different resources. Obviously, we can't explore absolutely everything that is out there on this show, but we want to just highlight some of the main ones that will be useful for you just to keep an eye on. The next one is the Azure Updates page, and what we'll do, we'll make sure that these are all linked in the show notes and in the video below as well. But Azure Updates is for more of those incremental changes to Azure services. So if you think about maybe it's not a brand new feature release or substantial release, they're kind of evolutions of these different Azure services. Azure Updates is a great place to go and check in on those. And there's been quite a few over the last few weeks in February. So to call out just a few of the noteworthy ones here, PowerShell on Linux is now generally available in Azure Functions, which is great news if you're trying to automate a lot of your Azure resources with Azure Functions. Another one, Azure Container Apps, a brand new preview service, which has been, I think, in preview since Microsoft Ignite now. One of the features we've heard a lot of people asking for is custom virtual network support, and that is now available in preview as of the beginning of this month, February the 2nd. So go and try that out if you've got that requirement. Azure Cache for Redis, the ability to have geo-replication in your enterprise tiers, Azure Communication Services capabilities in the UK, and the list just goes on. So this is where we really wanted to just show that this is one of many resources available, because you can see just the sheer amount of updates that are coming out in the Azure space there. Of course, Azure DevOps as well is another of those great services that we see a lot coming up in the developer space. So thinking of things like the Azure DevOps blog, where you can go and see the latest announcements which are happening in the Azure DevOps space of the world, but also then what's happening in the community as well. We've got some of our great advocates like April Edwards and Jay Gordon, who go ahead and regularly blog about things going on in the community in the DevOps space. So things like Pulumi and GitHub Actions here you can see, as well as then posts which are happening in the broader technical community as well. And we'll touch on the technical community a little bit later as well. And then finally, we've got a few more interesting Azure updates there as well, but we'll move on to GitHub. Just conscious of our time, so we can make sure we give enough time for our brilliant guest here today. But GitHub, of course, is another service I'm sure many developers tuning in right now will be familiar with. And there's a few links on GitHub just to be aware of as well. First one is the GitHub blog. There's a great section on there for like engineering posts, community posts, what's new in the open source space. They have like an open source release radar, and many other different big announcements come through the GitHub blog, just like the Azure blog. Renderbot is one of these great services, for example, that you'll find on GitHub to manage your dependencies. There's some developer experience tweaks there happening. A recent update around markdown files and being able to have mermaid diagrams in there for your documentation, which is awesome. But then there's also a changelog, just like there is with the Azure update side of things. There's a GitHub changelog. So lots of these different incremental enhancements to the GitHub platform. So GitHub issues, redesign of GitHub settings pages as well, and tweaks to how discussions work as well. So lots for folks to go and look at and review there. But I think we should go and move on now to our next phase here and introduce our speaker.
Think we should. We have a lot of hellos in the chat. So hi, everybody. Hello from the UK. We're so excited that you're here. If you're just logging in on, I'm Steph Rogers, or Regal Rogers on Twitter. And here is my co-host, Chris Reddington. So welcome, everyone. Hello. Oh, thanks for putting the hellos in the screen.
Excellent.
So yeah,
it's great to have the interaction. Yeah. So I think he's lurking somewhere in the background right now.
I believe so. Matt, are you ready?
Yep. Hello, everyone. How are you doing?
Oh.
Very well. How are you?
The first show.
Yes,
Thank you so much for volunteering.
You're going to be setting the bar for us here, so no pressure at all. But yeah, I guess you've got a really interesting topic here today for us. We're going to be talking DevOps and API management. There was lots of DevOps from the updates we did a minute ago with Azure DevOps and GitHub, but API management is one of those interesting areas as well when we think of integration.
It's one of those big challenges that companies have, is that actually the way that you deploy your backend APIs might be Azure Functions or Web APIs or in AKS or all those kind of services, and then compare those to how you deploy the APIs that they're wrapping effectively. And actually, there's a bit of a disconnect between deploying the APIs themselves and deploying the backend processes. Deploying the backend services is pretty much a well-established pattern. You know, both GitHub Actions and Azure Pipelines have built-in actions and built-in kind of pipeline tasks for doing the majority of those tasks. But actually for APIs, it's a little less well understood, and I'm hoping over the course of the next kind of half an hour or so, we'll be able to clear up some of that.
Excellent.
Awesome. And Matt, really quick, I know we have also a resource link for everyone to tune into so that way they can follow along.
Yep.
So that is right here on the screen, aka.ms/LunchBytes with a Y, /season 1, episode 1, so S1E1/resources. So diving onto that.
I think it was a bad idea to have the name LunchBytes over lunch when you're kind of hungry, because now I'm definitely getting that hunger feeling. So definitely have to think about that one. But Matt, I guess before we dive into the topic, it would be good just to do a little bit of an introduction about who you are and the day-to-day as well.
Yep. So I'm Matt Patunka, at Memleak on Twitter. I'm in the same team as Chris, actually. So we're both cloud solution architects, and we focus on what's called digital and app innovation. And digital and app innovation tends to be, I tend to usually jokingly call it all of the stuff that's not VMs and VNets. So it's all of the shiny developer tools that people like to talk about. So that will be things like everything from Visual Studio, VS Code, to DevOps, to GitHub, and then the platform services in Azure as well. So things like App Service, Azure Functions, Logic Apps, API Management, obviously, and then the integration platform. So things like Service Bus and Event Grid and topics like that. So it's quite a broad-reaching set of topics.
Awesome.
But it's a great fun role, to be honest, and we spend a lot of our time out talking with customers and helping them solve those problems. So kind of our primary objective is to make sure that customers are successful at what they do, hence the kind of the name of the role.
And I guess you mentioned customers in there. It's a really important topic, this one we're talking about today, because as we put in the abstract here, APIs are really this glue that connect these experiences. When we think about integration, we typically think about APIs, and having a good governance strategy around how you use all of those tools is really vital to being successful. So this is really what we're going to be exploring today, is how you can explore some of those deployment options for APIs and API management. So, you can integrate them into your continuous integration, continuous delivery or deployment pipelines to enable that success. That's really the focus of today, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And Azure as a platform provides a whole set of options. And then there are third-party tools that build on top of that as well, that you can integrate with. And what I'm hoping is that we'll show you by the end of today just some of those options and some of those ways of working. So I've got some demos coming up at the end, which will look at things like GitHub Actions and how we integrate API management with GitHub Actions. So yeah, stay tuned for those.
Excellent.
Well, I'll just crack on. Absolutely.
Matt, floor is yours.
Okay, do you want to bring up the slides?
Sure.
Excellent. So I think as we've already discussed, really, kind of a lot of my time is spent helping customers implement Azure solutions using these cloud native services. So things like API management, Azure Functions. And one of the big challenges I see time and time again is how to deploy those APIs. And how to deploy them in a way that mirrors existing development practices. So before I go too deep, let's do a quick summary of the basics first. It'll come as no surprise that APIs, well, I think, and Microsoft as a whole, think APIs are pretty important. They're the glue that binds together our kind of rich connected experiences with our data and services. If you click on, there's a little animation on there, Chris. There we go. Now, these APIs can be as simple as, if I've got some IoT device that's sitting logging data and I need to post those back to a server, that's an API, all the way up to something like Halo Infinite. I know Steph is a big Halo fan, so I had to shoot this in for her. But there are APIs that back that make sure that every player is matched with another player of equal ability when you go onto multiplayer. And the scale of those two things are radically different. These days, APIs tend to be HTTP based, and we do that because it plays really nicely with firewalls. And they send and receive data in standardized formats like JSON or XML. And that's because primarily there is really good tooling that exists out there to deal with those from a programmatic point of view. So why do you need an API manager? Well, as organizations grow, the number of APIs grow with them. And with that comes the standard challenges of scale. How do I, as an organization, ensure that all of my APIs are consistent in terms of authentication and structure? How do I abstract away the underlying implementation? So if I've got some legacy kind of SOAP-based XML APIs that are sitting on a data center somewhere, how do I present those to my clients, to my customers, in a way that's consistent with the new modern REST-based APIs?
And this is a really important point, Matt, isn't it? Because this is not uncommon. This is something I think we see in a lot of customer organizations. Yep. Got that legacy that they're trying to bring along and modernize and integrate with some of these new cloud native applications. So this kind of scenario is very, very common.
And you know, APIs aren't a new thing. You know, we've been developing APIs for the last 20 years. We may not have been calling them in the same way or defining them in the same way, but organizations have evolved over time to just have a large catalog of APIs. And it's now that they're starting to think about them as first-class citizens rather than kind of this binding element.
Gotcha.
You want to just slip back a bit? I think you jumped on one too many.
Yeah, sure. There we go.
So I think the other thing that's really important here is about this security piece. Is protecting an API is a super important thing, and whether that's making sure that there are IP restrictions so that only people with the right IP address can access it, or only people that are authenticated using OAuth or Azure AD can connect to your API. But there's also an element of how do I make sure I protect against maybe not necessarily bad actors, but bad code maybe. You know, if a code has a particular runaway condition in it, how do I make sure that my backend API is protected from a barrage of calls that are coming in? And of course, you know, there are malicious people out there that are going to be trying to do that as well. So how do I make sure we cover both of those bases? And all of that is kind of, you need that in a kind of centralized structure. And lastly, I think the important part here is about making sure that companies have a single place where people can get onboarded for APIs. Discoverability of APIs is a really tough problem. And the simplest solution for this is to have a kind of single reference point where you can have effectively a catalog of everything that's available. And it should be slightly more than a catalog. It should be a place where you can go and request access to. It should be a place where you can go and try APIs if you want, the try before you buy model. You should have good examples and good documentation in your portal. Okay, you can move on now. Now, for Azure, this service is the service that can fill this role is API management, and that consists of 3 components. It's got a management plane, and this is the service that handles all the configuration and deployment. This is essentially the Azure management plane. It's an Azure resource. It'll use all those same services. The gateway at the bottom is the thing that handles all the API calls. So when I, as a client, call an API, it's being routed through the gateway. That's the thing that's doing all the clever logic. And then there's an optional dev portal, which is the web-based UI that can be used to configure and manage the API management service. Now, by default, all 3 of these services are fully managed and hosted in your Azure subscriptions, which means you don't need to worry about the underlying implementation or databases or VMs or whatever it is that's backing these services. Now, I say by default because actually there are options in API management to install both the developer portal and the gateway under your own control. So effectively a self-host gateway and a self-hosted developer portal. The challenges you get with those is that you're now responsible for updates on those platforms. Want to move on again? Thank you. So API management, like all Azure resources, are deployed using the Azure Resource Manager. This means that you can deploy API management using the Azure CLI, the Azure REST API, the Azure portal, or any of the infrastructure as code tools. Now, native on Azure, those would be things like ARM or Bicep templates. if you want to go and look at third-party tools, you can see I've got icons there for Terraform and Pulumi. Now, one of the advantages of infrastructure as code is that templates can be parameterized easily, meaning the deployment you do to the dev environment will be functionally identical to all the other environments. And as the templates are just collections of text files, they can be subject to the same development practices as application code. So things like pull requests, pipelines, etc. And like as we mentioned earlier, both Azure DevOps pipelines and GitHub Actions contain built-in tasks for deploying templates. And actually, they contain built-in tasks for deploying third-party tooling as well. So if you want to do Terraform, then it's absolutely available to you.
This is maybe a good point to pause as well, because infrastructure as code isn't something which is just focused to APIs. It's really a cloud concept more broadly, I'd say, even outside of cloud. But to really be successful at managing your infrastructure at scale in these cloud environments, you really want to start looking at infrastructure as code as quickly as you can to be able to easily deploy those environments in a repeatable and easy way that effectively you can cookie cut those out and make them replicable.
Absolutely. I mean, how many customers have we dealt with, or how many environments have we dealt with where the first time people discover problems are in production environments?
Too many.
And this is usually the scenario here is usually that actually production is the special snowflake, to use the term, in that they are treated as a sacred entity because they contain different resources.
That's it.
Now, you're always going to want to scale down your lower environments to be effectively cheaper than your production environment, because you're not going to hold them to the same standards. But you still need to make sure that the right elements are in place and all the configuration is in place and any certificates that you need are in place, and that they're consistent through those environments.
Absolutely. And I'd just say, maybe for folks in the chat who are listening in, if you're looking at some of these icons like ARM templates and Bicep and Terraform and Pulumi and whatnot, and you're thinking, those sound interesting, I don't quite know what those are, but I'd love to get deeper into those. Let us know in the chat. Let us know at lunchbytes@microsoft.com, and we can make sure to prioritize that in our scheduling as well.
So so we're going to. I've got some demos actually that'll show later, that'll show kind of differences between ARM templates and Bicep templates and Terraform templates. So we can cover a little bit of that anyway. So before we jump into that demo, let's recap some of the basics again. So the most basic unit of an API is the operation. This represents an HTTP verb, typically a GET or a POST request on a specific URL. And I'm using here the icon has dad joke API as my example here. So we've got a get a random joke operation there. So operations in a single business domain are grouped together in an API. The API groups the operations under a single URL segment. So in this case, our URL is being built up now. So we've got /dadjoke /getARandomJoke. And click.
Yeah.
Thank you. Products group APIs together based on a particular client type. The product is going to be responsible for providing the subscription key that gives the user access to those APIs. So for example, I might have a product called internal APIs and external APIs. Subscribers to the external APIs will be restricted to only the APIs that are listed as part of that product. And click again. And supporting this are a number of other resources. Backends contain connection details about the underlying backend API. Name values contain configuration data that can be used in API policies. And curiously enough as well, name values also super useful in that they can be synced back to an Azure Key Vault if you want to move the management of things like secrets out beyond API management. Tags, like all other resources in Azure, are used for logically grouping those resources. And then groups allow you to control the visibility of the APIs in Developer Portal.
There's a number of interesting concepts in there that you mentioned, like the secrets piece, the tags piece as well, which are all some of these good governance practices, which again, super important and not necessarily just apply to APIs, but a lot of resources. Yep. So I'm sure we'll see a common thread across a lot of these episodes.
Yeah, and a lot of these things, they help when it comes to things like name values are super useful when it comes to deploying to multiple environments. they can be parameterized. They can be then passed from one environment to another, or changed from one environment to another, should I say. So the power of API management comes from its policies. Policies allow us to have an impact on the way the message is sent to the backend services and the response from it. Policies are defined as XML and can contain snippets of C# code. They can be injected at various levels of an API, and the impact will cascade down to lower levels. So, for example, if I want to restrict the number of calls a second a client can make, I might want to apply that at the product level, where it would impact all APIs and all operations on those APIs owned by the product. And that's assuming they're calling that using the right subscription key. Alternatively, I could apply the policy at the operation level, where it would impact everyone who called that specific operation only, independent of product. So let's see those in action. Now, if you want to just play the video. Okay, great. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an API management instance. Now, I've recorded this because it actually takes quite a long time in the real world to do. So we've sped things up and we've got a couple of time skips in there. So I'm going to go and create a new API management resource. I'm going to create that. I am going to put in some essential details, including which region I want. Oh, I made a mistake there. North Europe. We're going to give it a name, which I'm going to call LunchBytes something. And then we're going to specify who owns that and what their email address is. So my details will be on there. And then we're going to select eventually the SKU that we want. Now, if you want to have something like virtual network integration or high availability, you're going to select either the premium or the developer. The difference between them is the developer tier is throttled and doesn't come with an SLA. So you can see that prompt there that says, we don't recommend running this in production. In fact, you shouldn't run this in production because there are absolutely no guarantees that it'll stay up. And then we're going to move on to App Insights. So we're not going to choose App Insights for this one. If we were running premium, we would get the option to add additional scale units and additional regions here. Since we're not, we'll move on to the next, which is managed identity. Come on, move on. There we go. We're not going to be using managed identity, but it is a super useful service. VNet, we're not connecting to a virtual network. But if we did, we'd have the option to create that either internal or external. We're going to skip over tags and protocols because we don't think we'll just accept the defaults for those. And then we're going to click create. Now, this will take a few seconds. There we go. Massively sped up. Now, the interesting part whilst this is deploying is that we've generated an ARM template as part of this deployment. So in theory, I could take this ARM template, change the parameters, and now deploy that to a different environment. And I would have a functionally identical copy of API management running somewhere else. Right? This is a really important point about almost deploying any Azure service. So now let's go and add our API. So we'll jump into our deployed resource. And we'll go and see our API. We'll select our API there on the left-hand side. Now we've got the option here to either build our API manually or import it from an existing resource. We're going to go and build this one manually. I could import it from an Azure function or a Logic app or a container app now actually as well. So we're going to use this dad joke API. So I'm going to select that, type in some details, specify my backend URL. And I've got an option there to actually provide a API segment which I could append to all the requests, which we're not going to bother for the moment for the purpose of this demo. So let's go in there. And a couple of seconds to create. And what we'll now have once this is created is an empty API. So there'll be no operations on there yet. So we're going to go in and add an operation. And this is our HTTP verb under a specific URL. So we're going to do the let's search for dad jokes. And yeah, we're going to give it a URL. We're going to call it on. We know that this thing takes a term parameter, which is the term that you can search for. We know it's of type string, and we'll specify cats because everyone on the internet loves cats, apparently. So let's save that. Now, part of the Azure portal there is that we can now go in and test that API. So we can see all the details there. Is there a debate going on about cats v dogs?
It's something I was thinking maybe we should encourage.
Cats have the best
Personally,
jokes.
I am more of a dog person, I will say.
I would totally agree, but cats have the best jokes.
I mean, when we go on to the internet, it's the cat videos that win, right?
So we're going to test this API now. So I'm going to call that. And actually, you'll see this has come back a bit weird. It's come back as effectively an HTML page. And that's because we're not actually telling the backend API what format to return the data in. So instead of mandating that at the front end, we can add this as a policy. And I can go into my policy and say that before I send anything to the backend service, set a particular header. So we're going to set the accept header, and we're going to say this must come back as application/JSON. And then we save. Oh, I've got an extra bracket in there, I think, if I remember. Yeah. And then if we test that again now, in a minute. Run that as a test. We do the same test again. And you should see now we're getting some jokes back again, including my favorite, what you call a pile of cats, a meowton.
No.
Yeah.
So we can start doing other clever things now using the designer here, and we can add policies to basically limit the number of calls that are going to be made per second to this API. So we can use the designer here now and say, let's put in a rate limit, and we're going to say, I don't want anyone to be making more than three calls in 60 seconds. And we'll base that on the subscription key that they pass in. So we'll save that, and you'll see that that designer there has now edited our XML. It's done. Takes a few seconds. Eventually. There we go. So I now should be able to go and see that XML, and you can see we've added this rate limit line in there as well. So now if we call that API with the same parameters in, and then call it once, we get a status code 200, which you can see in green. It's another status code 200, and then on the fourth call, we're getting a too many requests, and we're getting a message back that says, try again in so many seconds. And this is how we protect our backend service from these malicious callers.
I think it's also how we protect ourselves from these dad jokes.
Okay. There's no protection from those. Go back to the slides.
Matt, we'll have to have you come back just to be like, all right, what's the dad joke of the day?
We can do that. I'm more than happy to do that.
Run the API, it'll be great every time.
Library of those. So let's pause for a minute and think about how API development works in the real world. So let's assume we create an Azure function with an HTTP endpoint. The code for that project will live in a repo somewhere, along with a bank of unit tests that prove what the code does what it's supposed to do. There might even be things like integration tests and load tests that ensure that when deployed, the API performs as expected. When a change to that code is made and pushed to a branch, the CI pipeline will build the project. The tests will be run, and if they pass, you potentially have a deployable artifact created. And that deployable artifact is then passed on to when a pull request is made. So effectively, you have this code process, this kind of code review process that's baked in with things like pull requests in Git. And when that happens, the CD pipeline takes over and grabs that produced artifact and makes sure they're deployed to each environment. Now, to complete this whole development lifecycle circle, we then gain insights from the function that's been deployed and the API that's deployed, and use that data to decide the next, if any, change is required. Now, infrastructure of code follows a very similar pattern. You might have some checks that are run on commit to make sure that the bicep files are valid. You might even run some of the kind of validation processes that some of the infrastructure as code tools have to check what will be deployed in the event of running this template. At that point, you've then got your deployable artifacts, which are the things that need to be deployed, and we can then hand those over to the CD pipeline to deploy to a different environment. And because they're infrastructure as code, they've got parameters on them, so we can use those to vary per environment. So if you think about how you deploy, so thinking about how you deploy infrastructure as code is important, because every single part of an API and API management is represented as an Azure resource. And because it's an Azure resource, that means an ARM template, or a Bicep template, or a Terraform file, or a Pulumi file, or whatever. So let's take the simple example of a back-end configuration in API management. So what you can see on the screen there is the definition of that back-end in ARM templates. If you click again, this is the same for a Bicep file. And in both of these examples, you can see the same sort of properties, and in Terraform and the third one as well. You're seeing a reference to the API management that this needs to be deployed to. You're seeing the properties that need to be set. And all of these things can be parameterized if you want, using the standard techniques for infrastructure as code. Now, when it comes to creating those infrastructure as code files, there are several options. We can create them manually. We can handwrite ARM or Bicep templates. I'd recommend handwriting Bicep templates, not handwriting ARM templates, because they're a bit more complicated. And Bicep has some nice extensions to make that a lot easier. We can use a tool to extract away some of those details. And arguably, that's something like Terraform does. Or we can copy the templates from an existing instance of API management. And we saw earlier in the demo, when we do a deployment, we get an ARM template. So there's a way of in Azure of generating the ARM template for any resource that's been deployed. The end result in all of these cases are deployable IAC templates, infrastructure as code templates. Now we want to make sure that those templates are only making the expected changes. And like I said earlier, there are tools that allow you to do that. So for ARM and Bicep, there's a thing called what if. So AZ deployment group what if you're using the Azure CLI, or new AZ resource group deployment what if you want the full PowerShell version. For Terraform, there's a thing called Terraform Plan, and that's exactly the same thing. It gives you a report that says, this is what will change when I deploy to my environment. And then we can just use the standard mechanisms for deployment. So AZ deployment group create, or Terraform apply. So let's go and see those in action. If you want to switch over to my share. Almost. So what I've got here is a very simple project, and I'll go through it in a bit. It's a web API, basically. So it's a stock to-do app web API written in C#, and it's using .NET 6. And it's very simple. It's not doing anything particularly clever. I've also got some Bicep files in here, and these are Bicep files to deploy the API management instance and the web API itself. So they're not related directly to the API, they're related to the backend resources and the Azure resources. Also within this project, I've got a couple of GitHub actions. So I've got one that deploys my Azure environment. So this will run my main Bicep file and deploy my API management instance and my web API and any storage accounts and things like that I've got there. And this uses a secret stored in GitHub Actions, which basically has permissions to be able to install stuff to Azure. And that's all you need to do for a Bicep deploy. It's relatively simple, right? If we wanted to do the full CI/CD, then I would break it up into snapshots and start saving artifacts and uploading artifacts to an environment, and then using those in a subsequent step. Similarly with the web API. So there are a whole load of built-in tasks for doing .NET. So I can do a .NET build, .NET test, .NET publish. I can then create those artifacts and then use the built-in tasks to deploy those. So there's web apps deploy, to deploy those up to Azure. So this is all using stock standard built-in processes. Now, if I switch over to my Bicep branch, I want to deploy an API now. So let's close that one up. Now, my to-do controller, if we have a look in the code, I've got enabled this ability to generate a Swagger file, and Swagger file is the new name for what's called OpenAPI now. And OpenAPI is a definition for your API. It's a JSON format, which we can see here, that defines all of the operations and all of the objects and all the schemas that are needed for that API. If you're a bit old school like me, you might remember things like WSDL from the SOAP days, and you might be screaming in horror at that point. But this is a very similar idea.
I love how like Swagger brings it to, all right, the new age, we got Swagger. It always makes me smile every time.
They've gone away from that name now. It's all OpenAPI all the way now. It's very rare. Okay. I've always loved the fact that the .NET NuGet package was called Swashbuckle. Yes, that was used to generate the Swagger files in .NET applications. I don't know. I've always loved that name. So if we go and have a look at our bicep files, which is our definition for our API in bicep, and it's very simple. We've got here a bit of code that grabs a snapshot, a reference to the existing API management instance. So I'm not going to be deploying this. I'm just using this as here's a reference to the thing that's already there. And that then has a name of it. And then we've got a back-end resource that gets deployed. And that resource has a type and a version. It's got some properties, the stock properties you expect, and it's reference to the parent. Okay. And then our API itself, now I could go through in Bicep and define each of the operations individually, but because I've got that Swagger file there, I can use this load text context to actually import our Swagger file as part of our API. So all we need to do is to maintain that Swagger file, and we could effectively reference that from the function itself if we wanted to as well.
That's pretty cool.
And again, it's all very simple, and we can configure whatever properties are available on any of these resources. And then lastly, I want to include a policy, and I've got an XML policy file here. That all it's doing is very simple, is just setting that backend service. Now I need to be able to deploy that. And if you've ever done this with ARM before, the way that those are referenced in the ARM files was effectively as an encoded XML string that was part of one of the properties in the ARM template. Yes. In Bicep, we can use that same load text context content and load that XML file in.
That's a lot cleaner. That's nice.
Which makes a lot, it helps a lot. And then our API, our workflow to deploy this is very similar to how we deployed the environment, because it's just a Bicep file. And I think that's the key takeaway I want you to get from this, is that actually deploying APIs is about just using the tools that are already there rather than trying to invent something new. So we're doing an AZ deployment group what if, and then an AZ deployment group create to deploy those files. And the end result will be a deployed API in our API management. If I want to do the same thing in Terraform, well, it'll look very similar. There's our Swagger file. Now you'll notice actually I've not got the policy XML file. And that's because Terraform has an even nicer way of doing this. So you'll see a lot of similarities. So there's a lot of Terraform setup up there, which we can ignore. There's our reference to our existing API management instance. There's our backend resource, looks very similar to the Bicep configuration. There's our API definition, and we're using the file function here to load in our Swagger file again. And then here's our policy, and Terraform has this ability to embed XML directly within Terraform definition. And then our deployment, we've got a bit of extra setup to set up the Terraform credentials. But actually, all we're going to do is we're going to do a Terraform init. We're going to do a Terraform, where's it gone? Oh no, that's the destroy. I've got the wrong one. There we go. That's the better one. So we've got a Terraform init to actually initialize Terraform and load all its components. We've got a Terraform plan, which is the thing that tells it this is what's going to change if I do deploy this. And then we've got a Terraform apply to actually push that out to a specific environment. Now, if you don't want to go down the route of creating Bicep or ARM or Terraform completely, there's a tool called the API Management DevOps Resource Kit that actually consists of two tools. There's a creator, which takes this YAML file. And it's a very, very simple YAML file. And I'm just going to create a new folder there called template. And it uses it to generate ARM templates. So if I bring up my terminal now, and I go to CD API, API, where am I? CD, there you go, CD creator, and then I run this tool against this APM template create. What that will do is generate me very quickly these ARM templates. And they're parameterized ARM templates. So there's our backend resource, same way we did before. And that's just generating it from this YAML file. So it's a very, very lightweight way of doing the same thing that we've done by hand in Bicep and Terraform. Now, the GitHub action for this is a bit more complicated, because as part of our pipeline, we need to install that toolkit on that environment. So I've created a simple composite action that just does all those things. I've got that there. You can see the code there that does that one. There we go. So there's my, and it's downloading it from the repo, running .NET build, installing it all, and then getting it all available on that agent. And that's pretty cool. And again, your deployment is then, I'm just using AZ deployment group create to install each of the templates individually. And I can do a what if on those as well if I want. Lastly, the other tool that's available in there is a thing called the Extractor tool. And I need to go new folder, templates. And this will take the configuration from an existing went down too deep. This will take the configuration from an existing API management instance, in this case called LunchBytes APIM, and then generate some templates based on what's been deployed in that environment. So if I now run that again, and we do APIM templates extract, using that configuration, that's now going to use my credentials to go out to that APIM instance and generate all of those ARM templates from that existing instance. And at that point, I can then use those templates in a new environment. So there we go. There's our generated. There's our APIs again, and it's generated all these files for us. And then the pipeline is very similar to the creator tool in that we have to install all those resources, run that extractor, and then we can deploy all of the individual resources out using AZ deployment group create. Now, appreciate I'm starting time. Do you want to go back to the slides just very quickly?
Sure.
So I just wanted to, before I finish, I just want to call out a great article on the Azure Architecture Center, which covers a lot of these details and particularly does some details around the pull request cycle using a version of the Extractor tool and the Creator tool. So I would recommend totally going and checking that out and looking at that, because there's a lot of useful hints on there and pointers to some of the stuff we've talked about already. So I hope this has been helpful. Like I say, if there's any questions or comments, indignant remarks, then please let me know.
That's been brilliant, and I think it sets the scene on really what this series is about, right? In terms of making sure that we're bringing some of those real world insights. I think we've heard a lot about API management in the past and the importance of APIs, but layering that all with the need for things like infrastructure as code and bringing that consistency to how you deploy them has been really insightful and interesting.
I think it's worth pointing out, and I hope that comes across in the presentation, I'm not precious about which tool you use.
Yep.
I think I've got customers that have been successful with all of these techniques. Yep. And I think it's important to find something that works for you and something that fits with the way that you want to develop. But actually, ultimately, it's going to be the same processes you're going to be using for all of your other infrastructure as code.
And really quick, I know some of us on the call, maybe not everyone's ready for the amount of detail and depth, and Matt, it was amazing. And so just in case you felt a little confused at any point and you're like, oh my gosh, I would have loved a little bit more of a refresher, we have down there in the links, we updated it mid presentation. Sorry, that was my bad. So it is the aka.ms/lunchbytes/s1e1/resources. So that way you can get that like level 100. So you can go back, watch this again and be like, oh my goodness, okay, I understand this bit that I might have not before. So,
and I think my repo's in that list as well, isn't it? With the examples of how this all works, all hangs together. And like I say, if you've got any questions, then feel free to contact me directly. You can find me on Twitter at MemoryLeaks or at MemLeak. So.
No memory here, just MemLeak.
Yeah.
Excellent.
We do have a question from Johan Lander. Dev portal, how to use that in APIM?
How do you use it? So, it's a deployable resource. You can go into your Azure, into your configuration portal, management portal in the Azure portal, and there is an option in there to publish. And once it's published, you can then go and there's two variations of it. There's effectively a management logon, an admin logon, and a user logon. If it's got your credentials there already because you're logged into the Azure portal, you're probably going to be in the admin logon, at which point you can go and add pages and create pages and update content and change styles and all those kind of wonderful things.
Awesome.
Probably
in terms of deployment,
I was just going to say a bit of context for anyone as well who doesn't know what the dev portal is. It might just be worth explaining a bit about that as well and why you do need that.
Yeah, so the dev portal is kind of it's our shop front for APIs. It's the here's your catalog, here's your organization's catalog of everything, all the APIs that we have currently managed under API management. It's a useful place for discovery, in that you can go and see what's there and things can be grouped by tags. You can get a certain amount of analytics for your usage. So you can see, where that API is being used, number of requests that are being made, the geographical regions where that particular subscription or that particular product is being used. In theory, although we don't directly support it, there are all the metrics are in place for doing monetization of APIs in there as well. But it's up to you as a provider as a customer to provide those monetization platforms because they bring their own regulatory challenges.
And I think that's it, isn't it? It's really in the scenario where it really shines is you're a provider of an API platform and you have consumers of that and you want to provide them some kind of experience so they can easily navigate the types of APIs that are available, test out those APIs and be aligned to a certain plan. That's what the developer portal gives you, is that nice UI wrapper around all of that.
Yeah, and things like requesting access. So once you've had a play and you want to have a go at use that commercially, then there's a process there where you can either be automatically approved or you have to have someone on the back end that sits there and says, yes, I acknowledge this person is going to be using this API. So it's a bit of a checklist. So.
Excellent.
It's a super useful tool, actually. I mean, it's particularly when you combine it with the idea to self-host. So if you're not happy with the version that's deployed out of the box, then there is a GitHub repo which has the dev portal in it. You can clone that, fork that, and deploy that to your own environment. Now, the challenge there is that you are now responsible for those updates for that API. But I think if you're going down the route of doing a massive amount of configuration on there anyway, you probably want that anyway.
Gotcha. I guess there's also that thought of Rome wasn't built in a day as well. I think what we've talked about here is quite an advanced topic in API management, bring that DevOps element to it. So, depending on where you are in that journey, getting API management set up and configured is a great step, is a great part along the journey. But yeah.
I was going to say, I think it's also worth considering, you want these deployments of APIs to fit the team that are managing the APIs.
Right.
There are organizations that will want one team that manages API management completely, including the APIs that are deployed to them. In which case, they might be managing all of the APIs in a single repo. You might want to have each team that owns a backend API managing also their front-end API piece. At which point, you split those up in as your development teams and your organization demands.
Awesome.
That's a good question on there.
I think that might be one maybe we'll leave either
We
as a
might
follow-up
take
for
it
the
offline.
next
Yep.
episode, or if you want to get in touch on lunchbytes@microsoft.com,
Yeah,
you can
absolutely.
go ahead and take a look at that.
Yep, for any questions that we missed, definitely, there's the email already pasted in the comments. Please email to, and also on the screen, please email us with any additional questions you have or any topics that you'd like us to dive in deeper on, and we'll grab the professionals from around here to say, all right, let's go a bit deeper into this and answer those tough questions that you have. Awesome.
Excellent.
Really quick for wrapping up, thank you, Matt. Thank you so much for
Yes.
being our first our first person.
It's an honor.
Presenting. This is awesome. So excited to have you. And go ahead.
Here we go. So, just one more useful bite of information. We like our puns here. If you're working with us already in one of our customers and you've got an account team, we've got a number of open hacks and cloud skills challenges that might be useful. So get in touch with them. You want to find out more information, that'll be the best way. And if you're not, get in touch at lunchbytes@microsoft.com. And we've had that link on the screen a few times, aka.ms/lunchbytes S1E1 here as well. And just one more, check out our UK Developer Hub, aka.ms/UK Developer. And we have a couple of those open hacks coming up that we just mentioned in the UK. The DevOps open hack is March 15th to the 17th, and we have one on containers as well on the 29th and 31st. So again, get in touch with your account team in the UK if you're working with them already. Otherwise, send us over an email at lunchbytes@microsoft.com.
And finally, we love our community. We especially love our communities across the UK. So we want to do a quick few shout outs to the Glasgow Azure User Group. Their upcoming event is today. Actually, it's tonight. I think it's 6:30.
Tonight, yes.
Yes, tonight. And then we have South Coast Meetup the 1st of March, so just next Monday. And then we have the Welsh Azure User Group, which is near and dear to many of our hearts on this call, the 16th of March. So find your local community. You can go to aka.ms/community, and I'll bring you right there. Oh, yes. And for next time, Chris, you want to kick off?
Absolutely. We've got, continuing the DevOps theme, DevOps for Logic Apps with Purna Bhavapali. So tune in March 9th, 2 weeks' time.
Really excited.
Wow. There we go. That's the first episode done. Exciting times. And
Yes.
we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time on March the 9th. Join us then, folks.
See you, everyone. Thank you, Matt.